There is a small habit almost every backyard birder has done at least once. You hear a chickadee calling from the feeder, and without thinking, you whistle back. A friendly little reply. You assume it's harmless, maybe even charming, a way of saying hello in a language you don't actually speak. Here's what nobody tells you. That whistle is not heard the way you think it is. And depending on the pitch, the rhythm, and the moment you chose to do it, you may have just told every bird in your yard that something dangerous is happening right above their heads. Welcome back to the Yard Observer. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to learn will change the way you think about every sound you've ever made in your own backyard. Today we're going into the real science of why whistling at birds is one of the most common well-intentioned mistakes a backyard birder can make, what it actually sounds like to them, and why a single bad whistle can quiet your yard for the rest of the day. Stay until the end, because the last part covers something almost no one expects, the one sound humans make by accident that birds trust completely, and the one most people are doing instead, all day without knowing it. Let's start with what a whistle actually is, acoustically, to a bird. To you it's a clean, simple note. To a chickadee or a cardinal, sound is information first and aesthetics never. Every pitch, every duration, every repetition pattern gets sorted instantly into one of a small number of categories: contact call, song, or alarm. There is no neutral bin. A sound either fits a known pattern or it doesn't, and an unfamiliar sound from an unfamiliar source defaults, almost every time, to the most cautious interpretation available. That's the part most people never think about. Birds are not built to assume good intentions from an unknown sound. They're built to assume risk until proven otherwise, because the cost of a wrong guess is usually survival. Here's where it gets specific. Human whistling sits in an unfortunate acoustic zone. Many human whistles land in a frequency range, and a sharp rising then falling pattern, that overlaps closely with the alarm calls several common backyard species use for aerial predators. The high thin C call that songbirds make when a hawk passes overhead is deliberately hard to localize, a thin, almost ventriloquial note that warns without revealing the caller's position. An untrained human whistle, especially a sharp 2 or 3 note one, can land close enough to that signature that birds react to the shape of the sound before they ever process where it came from. Researchers who study avian alarm communication have documented this category of response for decades. It's called a startle-flee response, and it's not a considered decision. It's a reflex, faster than conscious thought, wired in because the birds that pause to evaluate a possible hawk call usually didn't get a second chance to learn from the mistake. When that reflex fires from a human whistle, the bird doesn't process, that's just a person being friendly. It processes unknown sharp sound, unfamiliar source, treat as threat, and it acts accordingly, often before its brain has finished identifying anything at all. And it doesn't stay with one bird. This is the part that surprises most people the most. Researchers at Cornell Lab of Ornithology have documented what's called heterospecific eavesdropping. Birds of different species constantly monitor each other's alarm calls, not just their own kinds. When a chickadee gives a sharp warning note, nearby cardinals, nuthatches, and titmice don't wait to verify the threat themselves. They treat the chickadee's alarm as confirmed information and respond immediately, freezing, scattering, or going silent within seconds. A single misread whistle near your feeder doesn't just spook one bird. It can ripple through every species in earshot, because your yard's birds run on a shared early warning network, and that network doesn't pause to check sources. Crows complicate this picture even further, and not in the direction you'd expect. Crows are famous for facial recognition, for holding what looks like a grudge against a specific person for years. But crows also pay extremely close attention to sound, and a whistle aimed in their direction gets folded into the same profile building process researchers at the University of Washington have documented in crow populations. A crow that hears an unfamiliar whistle paired with a human presence doesn't necessarily flee the way a chickadee does. It often does something quieter and in its own way, more consequential. It watches, it remembers, and it associates that specific sound with that specific person, filing it away alongside everything else it's learned about you. If the whistle happens to coincide with anything else the crow reads as disruptive, a sudden step toward the feeder, a raised hand, that pairing can stick. Crows have been documented holding negative associations for over a decade, long after the original moment that caused them. A whistle alone is unlikely to create that kind of lasting record. But it is one more variable in a profile that, once written, is remarkably difficult to revise. Here's the part that's genuinely hard to hear if you've been whistling at your birds for years out of affection. The silence that follows isn't nothing. It's a cost. Every time birds flush from a feeding site in alarm, they burn energy they didn't plan to spend, energy that, especially in winter, may have been the entire day's caloric margin. A chickadee weighs about as much as 2 pennies. Its daily energy budget is calculated in grams and calories with almost no slack built in. An unnecessary flight response triggered by a friendly whistle is not free. It's withdrawn directly from a budget that was already tight before you opened your mouth. There's a second layer to this that has nothing to do with alarm and everything to do with reputation. Birds that visit the same yard repeatedly build what researchers describe as a working model of that environment, including the humans in it. A yard where unpredictable, unfamiliar sounds happen often, sounds that don't match any pattern the bird has learned to trust, gets quietly downgraded. Not abandoned immediately, but visited more cautiously, with shorter feeding windows and faster departures. The bird isn't holding a grudge in the way a crow famously can. It's running a continuous risk calculation, and an unscored, unfamiliar whistle is one more data point nudging that calculation in the wrong direction. This is where the science gets specific about which sounds make things worse and which barely register. Pitch matters. Most concerning whistles fall in a high register, similar to the thin alarm notes of small songbirds. A lower-pitched, breathy whistle is less likely to trigger the same reflex, simply because it doesn't resemble the warning vocabulary as closely. Repetition matters too. A single short whistle is far less disruptive than a rapid repeated series, because repetition is exactly the pattern real alarm calls use to communicate escalating urgency. The well-meaning birder who whistles back and forth several times, thinking they're having a charming exchange, may actually be performing, acoustically, something close to an escalating threat broadcast. Timing compounds all of it. A whistle during a calm midday lull, when birds are already relaxed and feeding steadily, is processed very differently than a sudden whistle the moment you step outside, which is also the moment birds are already running their highest alert assessment of you specifically. Layering an unfamiliar sharp sound onto that exact window is, acoustically, close to the worst possible timing available. It's the equivalent of approaching someone already on edge and immediately raising your voice. Season changes the stakes even more than time of day does. During nesting season, typically spring through early summer across most of the United States, parent birds are operating with almost no margin for error. A startled flight response near an active nest doesn't just cost energy. It can mean abandoning a feeding run to nestlings that are hungry on a tight schedule, or worse, drawing attention to a nest location that was deliberately hidden. Research on nest predation risk consistently shows that repeated disturbance near a nesting site increases the chance a predator notices it, simply because agitated parent activity is itself a visible signal. A whistle that might cost you nothing in October could cost a brood everything in May, and most backyard birders have no way of knowing, from the outside, whether the pair at their feeder is currently provisioning a nest 20 feet away in the hedge. Migration season adds yet another layer most people never consider. In spring and fall, your yard isn't just hosting its regular residents. It's also a waypoint for birds that have just completed, or are about to attempt, an exhausting multi-hundred-mile journey, arriving with depleted fat reserves and very little tolerance for wasted energy. A migrating warbler resting in your shrubs for a single day before continuing north is operating on a survival margin so thin that ornithologists describe these stopover sites in terms of triage, not comfort. An unfamiliar sharp sound at exactly the wrong moment can push an already exhausted bird to flee a resting spot it desperately needed, with no guarantee it finds an equally safe one before dark. Now here's the part of this video that changes how you'll think about your own yard going forward, because not all human sound is treated the same way, and the contrast is the real lesson. Birds habituate, meaning they learn over time, to sounds that are consistent, predictable, and not patterned like alarm signals. Research out of the University of Exeter on garden birds found that birds in residential yards develop individualized tolerance for specific, repeated human sounds and movements, the same footsteps on the same gravel path, the same door closing at the same time each morning, the same low voice. None of those sounds resemble alarm calls in pitch or rhythm, and repetition in this case works in your favor instead of against you, because predictability is itself the signal that something is safe. This is the actual mechanism behind something every backyard birder has experienced and never had a name for: the birds that don't flush when you walk out, the cardinal that keeps singing instead of going quiet, the chickadees that keep feeding 3 feet away while you stand at the railing. That isn't because those birds have been desensitized into ignoring danger. It's because your ordinary, repeated, unremarkable sounds have been sorted correctly into the category of harmless background. Your footsteps have a pattern now. A whistle doesn't. It's new every time, structurally unpredictable, and structurally similar to the one category of sound your birds are specifically wired to treat with maximum suspicion. So what does work, if the goal is connection rather than alarm? The honest answer from the research is almost anticlimactic. It isn't a clever sound at all. It's consistency. The same time of day. The same slow, unhurried movement. The same quiet presence near the feeder, day after day, without sudden noise layered on top of it. Cornell's long-running feeder watch research and field studies on human habituation in urban and suburban birds both point to the same conclusion. Trust in a backyard bird population isn't earned through a clever call. It's earned through reliability, the boring, repeated proof that nothing bad happens when you're around. If you do want to make a sound that birds are more likely to tolerate, the science suggests low, soft, non-repetitive sounds, a quiet hum, a low murmur, something that doesn't share the acoustic shape of an alarm note, used sparingly rather than as a constant exchange. But even then, no sound will do the work that simple, boring consistency already does for free. The birds that trust your yard the most are not responding to anything clever you said to them. They're responding to weeks or months of you doing nothing alarming at all. Here's where this becomes bigger than one habit worth breaking. Every yard runs on an information economy that has almost nothing to do with what humans intend and almost everything to do with what the sound itself resembles. Birds don't have access to your intentions. They only have access to the acoustic shape of what you produce, and that shape gets matched, instantly and unconsciously, against a vocabulary built over millions of years to keep small, vulnerable animals alive in a world full of things that want to eat them. A whistle that resembles an alarm call will be treated as one, no matter how much warmth was behind it. That doesn't mean your yard is fragile, or that one whistle will undo months of trust. It means the relationship you're building with the birds outside your window is more literal than most people realize. It isn't a feeling. It's a running, accumulating record of every sound and movement you've ever produced near them, sorted constantly into safe or unsafe, and updated every single time you step outside. You've likely been making deposits into that record for years without knowing the ledger existed. There's something almost humbling in that, once it settles. We tend to think of ourselves as the ones doing the watching, standing at the window with coffee, observing the cardinal, narrating its life to ourselves. But the observation has always run both directions. The bird on the feeder is doing its own quiet accounting of you, in real time, with a precision that has nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with survival. It doesn't care that you meant the whistle kindly. It only has access to what the sound resembled, and it responded to that, not to your intention. That gap between what you meant and what was actually received is where most human-bird misunderstandings in the backyard quietly live. So the next time you hear a chickadee calling from the feeder and your first instinct is to whistle back, pause for half a second instead. Let the silence sit. Let your ordinary, familiar, slow-moving presence do the work it's already been doing, quietly, for longer than you've given it credit for. The birds in your yard are not waiting for a clever reply. They're waiting to see again whether you're still the same predictable, unremarkable, trustworthy shape moving through their world that you've always been. Most days, you already are. Now you know why that matters more than any whistle ever could. If this changed the way you think about your own yard, tell me in the comments. Have you ever noticed your birds go quiet right after you made a sound you thought was harmless? I want to hear what happened. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.